Welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast, where we explore the connection between nutrition, performance, and health for busy, active people. My name is Claire Shorenstein, and I'm a board-certified sports dietitian and endurance athlete with over 10 years of experience working with teenage and adult athletes of all abilities. I started this podcast to provide evidence-based guidance, inspiring athlete stories, and practical tips on a wide variety of nutrition topics so that you can feel better, crush your endurance goals, and thrive as a human being. Today, I'm chatting with sports dietitian and endurance athlete Maurten Thomas. Maurten currently is the U.S. performance nutritionist for Maurten, where she educates and consults with athletes and teams to fine-tune training and racing fueling strategies. Prior to joining Maurten, Maurten worked as a tactical performance dietitian within the U.S. Special Operations community as part of a greater integrated human performance team. And way before that, Maurten and I briefly worked together in private practice back when I lived in New York City, so I was really excited to reconnect with her and learn all about what she's been up to over the last decade. This episode is a bit of a grab bag of topics, as we thought it would be really interesting to explore the many different nutrition challenges and themes that Maurten has observed in her different dietitian roles, and especially as a tactical dietitian and during her time at Maurten. We focus on sodium bicarbonate, which I've covered recently, but obviously wanted to get Maurten's take as it is straight from Maurten. And we chat about the periodization of fueling. We also explore her observation of how athletes are consuming too much sodium here in the US compared to the EU. Apparently, it is really not a thing in the EU. So that was really interesting to chat about. We talk about how fueling differs in different sports, for instance, shorter distance compared to longer distance running, and also how to figure out when to fuel if dealing with technical terrain or a lot of elevation changes, and so much more. But those are the main things we talk about. So there really is something for everyone in this episode, and I hope you enjoy it. All right, let's dive in. Maurten, welcome to the Eat for Endurance podcast. How's everything going today?
Hey, Claire. It's going great. Super excited to be here and catch up with you.
Yeah, so Maurten and I go way back, although we kind of crossed paths very, very briefly. We worked at Nutrition Energy, which was or is a private practice. Lauren Antonucci's practice. Lauren's been on my show as well a couple times, but that was like my very first private practice job as a new dietitian. And were you like kind of earlier in your career at that point, or you're a little, relatively speaking? Yeah. We crossed paths very briefly, and then Maurten, you went on to do all these great things. And as I always like to start these interviews, I really want to hear about your background as a dietitian, because we actually haven't talked that much since then, and also as an athlete, because I understand you like to race and train hard.
Totally. Yeah, I'm happy to share, give a little insight. I was an athlete growing up all my life. I was a competitive gymnast and then a springboard diver in college. Nutrition really wasn't a forefront. I knew it was important, but it really wasn't talked about that much. And obviously being more, weight conscious sports, it was something that was not necessarily promoted so much. And then I fell into running and distance and realized that nutrition actually makes a really big difference. And maybe I want to study that more. So yeah, I went to graduate school for nutrition education and knew I wanted to work with athletes from the very beginning. I knew that was the space I could connect with athletes and their goals. And I just found the whole kind of area of the physiology behind it fascinating. So kind of that took me in my career and ended up, crossing paths with you in private practice in New York with Lauren Antonucci, which was a fantastic learning experience. Then I really wanted to get a sense of the collegiate world, kind of circling back to my own collegiate sport career. I could realize like how much of a need that was to give them proper nutrition. So went to University of Georgia as one of the sports dietitians there, and then took a bit of a shift and ended up moving back to the East Coast where my family is, and going to the tactical space where I was for 7 years supporting the military as a performance dietitian. And now, years later, it's a long story. I am now working more in the sports nutrition company based out of Sweden.
And you were telling me before we recorded that the team is quite small, it seems like. I've had some interactions with the European dietitian, and I had no idea that you were at Maurten until we touched base about recording this. So yeah, explain a little bit about kind of what the nutrition team looks like and what you do in your role.
Yeah, I think it always surprises people how small just the whole company is. Very small but mighty and growing quick. But yeah, there's only 8 North American employees. I am the only nutrition employee, so the only dietitian covering all of North America right now. Hopefully more growth in the future. But yeah, my colleagues are in the EU, so some early morning calls, but it's great. So my role is really multifaceted. I tend to support our North American athletes, whether that's our sponsored athletes, elite groups we're working with, as well as our amateur athletes that just want to learn more about the product. We have partnerships with New York Marathon, Boston Marathon, Chicago Marathon. So it's like, how do we make sure we're showing up in a way that's very authentic and promoting proper nutrition, working with run groups, just kind of you name it. That's the gamut of making sure everything we put out from the marketing copy perspective is also, evidence-based and passed through from a dietitian's eyes. So yeah, lots of different challenges, which keeps me on my toes.
Are you the one, are you traveling to races to kind of represent the brand or giving talks, or what kinds of things are you doing there?
Yeah, lots of travel, which has been fun. So yeah, going to the major marathons, usually speaking at the expo, doing a panel with some of our athletes or coaches, which has been really fun to get, the shared perspective of both the RD, but also the user and the coach. And then yeah, meetings, different run groups, all that sorts of things. So it comes with some good travel.
That's really cool. I mean, I think a lot of dietitians love just having your hands in all these different places and doing this wide variety of stuff. I know for myself, I just get very bored if I'm just doing the same exact thing. So it's nice to be able to, have all these different roles within your role and to be able to work, because it sounds like you're working individually with athletes. You have a wide variety of athletes, you have groups, you have all kinds of things. That sounds really exciting.
Yeah. I think all dietitians like to wear a lot of different hats. It's just
Yes.
part of our personality.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say specifically about Maurten. One of the things we thought we would do today is kind of a grab bag of topics, kind of coming back to, you've seen a lot, obviously, in your many, many years as a dietitian in different spaces. So you've been in the private practice space, you've been in the collegiate space, the tactical space, and now Maurten is kind of, I would say, this kind of competitive athlete space. Although, of course, we have amateurs as well, right? But you're kind of seeing this broad range of all these different athletes. And, I'm sure because we're encompassing so many populations in that statement, we'll kind of narrow it down a little bit. But maybe we can just focus a little bit on your time as a tactical dietitian, kind of working with special ops. And I know we're limited in what we can say there. We were just talking about our mutual friend and dietitian, Callie, who's also been on this podcast, and we discovered she cannot speak so much about her work on the podcast. We can kind of thinking about that. And then also Maurten, some of the themes that you've been seeing in recent years, because, there are a lot of challenges that we see or interesting discussion points or whatever else. So, we kind of identified a few areas of discussion and we can kind of just see where it goes. So yeah, why don't we kind of just see where this conversation leads? And yeah, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, sure. And I am super interested to hear if any of these you're seeing as well on the private practice side. It's been a while since I've been solely in that world. So super interesting to compare and contrast what, I have a feeling a lot of the same messages we're all preaching is similar. But I think one takeaway, especially from my time in the tactical world. So I was, just for context, I was embedded in one unit. I supported one unit, and I was able to work alongside a sports psychologist, a strength and conditioning coach, a physical therapist, a doc, a sports medicine, physician, all of these amazing professionals that could
such a luxury.
I know. And that is one thing I
you never get that.
Yeah. And I think seeing how powerful that approach can be is really amazing. If you have someone, I feel like we as dietitians end up talking about a lot of these things, their injury, their sleep, their things that encompass nutrition touches, but isn't necessarily the deep dive that we're going to spend time on. So to be able to be okay, you're going to go see the sports psych to talk about nailing down your sleep patterns, and then you're going to get this injury fixed, and then I'm going to do the nutrition that's going to support all of that. I think the power of really recognizing all of these multidisciplinary components can be so useful for any athlete, regardless of level, to really accomplish their goals, but also feel so much better doing it. Yeah, I don't know if you tend to see that in the private practice space, like referring out and being able to create a network. I don't know, it's a lot harder when they're not in the same office.
It's harder. It's cost, right? Like I know in my practice, like I don't accept insurance. Not all sports dietitians do. And then like a lot of PTs, maybe they don't. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't accept insurance. There are a lot of things that are like therapists, so like often, of course, I'm referring out whenever possible. And sometimes people come to me with, a team already in place. I would say it's not as common. I would say most often people have their doctor who they may or may not be happy with. Sometimes people are like, I don't like my doctor. And they said my ferritin of 10 was fine. And this is why I'm here. Like literally, just got another one of those yesterday. But sometimes people come, they're like, they have a therapist, they have this and that. And then other times people really need that. But yeah, it's tricky in the private practice space because everything is so disjointed. And yeah, I haven't ever worked in that environment, but I've heard about it from Callie and now from you and others kind of in similar spaces, or even sometimes in the collegiate setting where they have all these resources available that the everyday athlete doesn't necessarily have unless they have the time and the finances to really seek those things out and get it done. And also depending on where you live, you might not be in an area that even has access to these things, right? So, sometimes people are working with me because I do telehealth. Like people are working with me because they would rather see someone in person, but they live in some rural area and they literally have no one nearby that has the expertise in such a niche thing, right? Like endurance sports, let's say. So it's one of those things where it's like such a nice to have. And I always respect my expertise, of course, but like I do find myself, having to kind of lean a little more heavily and really advocating for my clients a bit more with their physicians or with their specialists or whoever. But no, I definitely, as much as I possibly can, try to speak and like I always communicate with therapists or doctors or whoever as much as I can. But yeah, it's not as integrated as what you're describing. Like that's really the ideal world, isn't it?
It truly is. It's like, such a luxury if you get used to, and then when you don't have it, it's it's more challenging. But even just being able to learn from other professionals as in RD has been helpful too. So I can kind of like think of these things when I'm working with athletes. But nutrition touches literally everything. So it's nice to have a sense of like common goals that, I'm just using like sleep as an example, but like common goals of things that they might be doing to work on their sleep that nutrition can help or hurt with, or whatever. We're having the discussion around caffeine or alcohol, and it's like going to affect so many things. So yeah, I think it was both good learning for me and really nice for the soldiers as well.
Yeah. And I will say, like, I tend to have, whenever I'm working with somebody, like, it's not uncommon for me to have sleep goals or stress related goals or whatever. But then, of course, like when needed, be like, okay, you need a higher level of care. We need to, refer out for specific testing or for this and that, whatever. So I think that's what's nice about kind of the work that we do is that, as you said, there's a lot of overlap, but then at a certain point, you have to encourage someone to go somewhere else. Because sometimes what happens is, and I get this sometimes where people do not have anyone else and they just want to invest in you and they kind of want you to wear all the hats for all of the practitioners. And you have to be like, nope, I'm not your running coach and I am not a doctor and I'm not your therapist. So, we have to make sure that we draw those boundaries as well. But
totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know one of the other things you had mentioned was like periodization of fueling. So what do you kind of want to mention there?
Yeah, I think given I've seen different environments, whether we're talking tactical, we're talking more the endurance athlete with Maurten that I'm working with, or we're talking about a collegiate athlete, like there's going to be harder weeks, harder days. There's going to be easier days if you're following like an appropriate training plan or whatever you're working towards, whatever. So I think it's a lot of athletes, and I've seen this, and I'm curious if you have as well, but seeing that like athletes get into their routines of like, all right, I always have a piece of toast before my run or my game day practice or whatever. And then they don't think about how maybe that nutrition should change on days they're doing 2 workouts or, days that they're having a tournament weekend, or I don't know, name the thing, or even, soldiers that are going out the door. We have to be able to adjust our nutrition to match our demand. And hopefully it's being talked about more, but I think think historically, some athletes run into some trouble of accidentally maybe under fueling on those really hard days and not supporting, like linking the intensity or the duration to the energy required for that.
So it sounds like you're saying that this is a common mistake that you see people make in your experience.
Yeah, I think it's a common thing that we can optimize or like improve. I'm glad they're fueling to begin with, right? But it's like, hey, when you are working harder during a training session, that's going to require a higher percentage of carbohydrates. You're going to be burning through things harder. Recovery is going to be even more important. So how do we take a look at, the track session on Tuesday instead of just the long run on Saturday? As, I think, especially working with runners, as I know you work, I'm sure, with a lot of them, the long run fueling, it's like, okay, that's what I'm focused on, which is awesome. But it's like, let's look at the bigger picture here. Are you supporting the other quality days of the week, which might be, again, like meeting up with the group on the track, doing some repeats, like at a hard effort? We're not fueling during that, like red flag.
Yes. I literally just had this conversation with a cyclist this morning who, she has her long rides, and then midweek, like in the evening, every week she meets up with the group and they do like a 1.5 to 2.5 hour ride that's at a bit more of a higher intensity. And she just wasn't fueling it at all. Or maybe she would feel it a little bit, but she definitely wasn't having like an adequate snack before and all of this, because in her mind, it was like a shorter session. But, it's like a short endurance session. So it's still a longer session. So one of the things we've really worked on is like, adding, a second carb-rich snack right before, because the timing was a little weird. So it throws off dinner time. And so it's like almost a mini meal and timing that, and then adding carbohydrates to that ride and how much better she feels. And so like, some people are like on top of it, but not everyone thinks about these things. Do you teach people this like through like performance plates, or like how do you kind of tend to teach people about fueling themselves on different days?
It really depends. It depends on the athlete and the kind of their level of awareness already, I think. And sometimes we're looking at the meals around it, and sometimes we're looking more at the in-session fueling, right? So, or it's both. So maybe it's looking at that performance plate, like, okay, we're dialing it up to half a plate of carbohydrates on these double days. And then during the session, maybe it's only an hour 15. And maybe you wouldn't normally fuel, but you have another session that day. We need to fuel to support the next one. So like, it's almost like zooming out a little bit rather than just let the athlete think about this one isolated siloed session. It's like, let's look at the greater demand of your body. And I try to teach that a few different ways depending on where they're at with their own kind of nutrition journey.
Yes, absolutely. Like I do that as well, where we're doing like this combination of, okay, we're thinking about where we're at in that day, but always remember to zoom out and think about what you just did and what you're about to do. So kind of looking at the cluster of days, but then zooming out even further across the week or even month. So like when we're talking about what your needs are, like I was actually with the same cyclist this morning because she was a little overwhelmed. But, sometimes we're throwing a lot of information at them and she was a little overwhelmed. And I was like, okay, the TLDR version is the more you exercise, the more carbohydrate you need. But it's a little bit more layered than that, because on a rest day, it depends. Our favorite phrase. What did you do yesterday? What are you about to do? Like I have a collegiate rower, for instance, who's doing insane level of training, and her coach just gave her 4 to 7 days off completely because she was doing 3 workouts a day. And she was saying how she was struggling to figure out how to eat in those rest days, and her appetite was different and whatever. And I was kind of explaining, I was like, look, this is a time for your body to catch up. I know you haven't been meeting your needs and we've been working on it, but we're not there yet. So this is like, do not change what you're doing. Maybe we're changing strategies to deal with appetite, and maybe we're doing liquid nutrition. And so we're kind of like shifting things slightly, but we're not reducing. And it's a very finite period of time, and she's about to dive back into hard training. So again, yes, we're focused on the day to day, but then we have to zoom out and think like, what are we ultimately doing? What are we recovering from? What are we about to do? So I think this is such a huge one that people often miss, and we can make like huge gains in performance and health by changing that up.
Yeah, I think you bring up such a good point about the week to week or the month to month, or like the overall load on an athlete. It's not going to be like, I always remind athletes, like your body isn't like, oh, 24 hours is up, like restart, like we're at zero, It's, they're like, well, I'm a rest day, I don't really have to worry about fueling. It's like, not with the volume you're doing, right? So we need to think about this, like, again, bigger picture and like weeks, months, like seasons for the grower, whatever it might be. Like, sure, in the off season, maybe that nutrition is going to look a little bit different, but right now you're going right back into heavy training. So we need to support it.
Yeah. Totally. Another thing you brought up was about track and shorter distance athletes and their in-session carb intake. I would say the only people I work with in this area would be some of my teenage clients. I don't tend to work with adult shorter distance athletes for the most part. That's just not who I attract with Eat for Endurance, It's not who I tend to attract client-wise. Like I have some cyclists who are doing shorter things or like other people who are doing shorter efforts, but running specifically, not so much. So yeah, I'm curious to hear kind of what your take on this theme is, and we can discuss.
Yeah, I've seen it both from just like working in the collegiate space, but also supporting a lot of NCAA programs now just through Maurten and education. Like, it seems from the outsider's perspective that the fueling culture is a bit behind in terms of, the expectation of carbohydrates during a long run, carbohydrates during their sessions, especially our NCAA runners. Like, they can be running pretty decent mileage over the course of a week and really doing some quality workouts. And it's like, I've heard stories that it's, they're taking a gel during a long run and they're like, why are you doing that? So it's still this culture that I hope we're all, able to start to influence and change. But it seems a little bit more behind the endurance marathoning, insert longer endurance exercise here of that expectation. So yeah, I think it's a unique problem set to kind of both get into it from the culture side, but also just the education around what we were talking about before, like more intensity, more carbs are needed. Like, the day-to-day is super important. The bigger picture of the week is super important. So yeah, I think it's just been a little eye-opening for me, who came from working mostly with endurance athletes, to see, these shorter distance being like, we got to get some fuel in you.
Yeah. I work with a lot of cross country and track runners in high school and in the college setting. I worked with a high jumper for a while. Also, like the travel schedules, but their overall workout times, especially high school too. Students, anytime I did a whole interview on student athletes, it's so challenging because they have a huge course load and they're just juggling so many things and they have so many training sessions and they're traveling with practice and, meets or whatever's going on. So it's like a lot to handle. And then especially with track and the way it's set up, it's like, I guess you kind of have a sense of when you're going, but not always. So it's like, it's not like a major marathon or whatever, where it's like, this starts at this time and this is how you prep. It's like, there's so much up in the air about when you're actually gonna race or compete. And so we're constantly like trying to figure out snacks and this and that. And like, you're also like on some bus and trying to deal with someone else's like schedule. Yeah, it's such like an interesting, different thing. So I've definitely worked with it a bit, but that's not like my regular populations. I guess I haven't had a chance to really observe it up front like you have in terms of the culture. I know in some of my work with swimmers, competitive swimmers and like on swim teams, and this was actually back when I was working at Nutrition Energy, because Lauren would attract a lot of swimmers to her practice, that definitely the culture of fueling was not there. And I remember her saying like she would have to have chats with coaches and do presentations to coaches and parents, but like not, the coaches not letting them take breaks to fuel. And like no one, I think it's really hard when, yeah, especially when you're a teenager and you're trying to like take a gel or sip on a sports drink and literally no one else is doing it. You're not going to do that.
Yes.
There's no way. I have the hardest time convincing my teenagers to do things like even like to pack a lunch or pack snacks. They're like, I'm not carrying something. Like, so it's so hard.
It's a totally different ballgame. It's so true. There's so many other like factors that are influencing their nutrition behaviors versus just like the knowledge of knowing I need to fuel. It's what are my counterparts doing? What's it going to look like? What does the coach want me to do? So yeah, I think that brings up like such an interesting challenge. And I think like you said, like a lot of times it's worth targeting like the coaching staff versus necessarily just the athlete or the parents or Or, how do we get this like broader
Yeah.
approach to get everybody on the same page?
And one thing I think might be useful for listeners, because, many of my listeners, I'm sure, are parents, and you might have your kids in team sports or whatever it is that they're doing. And if you observe that it is not a culture that is supportive of fueling appropriately, like, yeah, as a parent, talk to the coach, and see like what's going on there. It's worth doing. Maybe there's a local dietitian who can give a presentation or something like that. Or, I'm available. I do presentations too, but I'm sure there are like local dietitians that give talks to teams and stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's just worth kind of checking in on that kind of thing. It's definitely a challenge for sure.
Yeah. No, and I think, even just like bringing up the swimming aspect, like you're not going to have a halftime, during the middle of your swim set to just like munch on a bar. Like most of the time, if it's not in a bottle, it's probably not happening. And like during a swim session, and even that, like some athletes probably aren't showing up with a sports drink or a, liquid fuel type of opportunity there. So it's also like sport specific, what actually works with the sport and the challenges that come with
Well,
that.
and even like some of the things that we do. And so I'm also kind of thinking about, okay, like what if, so maybe some of my recreational adult athletes, if they're doing like, I don't know, a shorter running race or whatever it may be, like often we think, okay, yeah, maybe I don't need to fuel during that session. And that might be true. Maybe you don't need to fuel during, you don't necessarily need to fuel during a 5K or even a 10K. Maybe you're just sipping on something or whatever. But we do need to consider, like, as you pointed out, like, especially with these more competitive athletes, or maybe for you, if you're not necessarily a competitive athlete, but thinking about like, what is your total training volume looking like? We still have to consider like fueling before and fueling after and kind of all the supportive things that we're doing. So I think sometimes with sports that are not endurance focused, and I know on this podcast, we're largely talking about endurance, but for the things that aren't, like track athletes, cross country athletes, they're still training a ton. So we're still considering, okay, you're lifting, you're cross training, you're doing running, like, so we still have to kind of support all that. And so even for say, like you're doing a swim practice, like, can we at least like get a carb-rich snack in right before you get in the pool or whatever? Like if that's the best you can do, great. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of help support athletes. Or again, if you're listening and you have a child who's in a team sport or you're observing something, or maybe you're a collegiate athlete or whatever, like there's lots of things that you can do to ease your way into it, especially if you're not comfortable in your environment or you're not comfortable yet speaking up. But yeah, that's definitely an interesting observation. I'm always interested in the different cultures of fueling from sport to sport. I often talk about like how climbing compares to like running or, whatever. So it's interesting to look at that.
And then you have cycling that's like pushing,
yes,
very high, most cyclists, which is amazing, but like pushing very, very high amounts of carbs. So it's like so sport specific and culture specific. And yeah, I think one more thing, just like on that note, is helping an athlete maybe identify when to use like real quote unquote food, bananas, bars, you name it, dates, I don't know, snacks. And then when is it going to be more important to use a more specific sports nutrition fuel product? And I think that is also good because you don't always need to be ripping gels. You don't always need to be ripping bananas, right? So it's like getting that nuance down for athletes and helping them experiment, I think is also helpful because it kind of comes back to that like intensity and duration is going to dictate how you're going to fuel each session, and helping the athlete hopefully find, all right, easy sessions. Yeah, I'll take a banana. I'll do, some other kind of graham cracker, whatever, real food option. But maybe my hard workout, I'm going to take a gel or a sports drink. And being able to differentiate, I think, can also be helpful because it can be overwhelming if you're like, I just need to have gels all the time.
Yeah, totally. This episode is brought to you by my monthly nutrition membership, Fuel for Life Crew. Whether you're navigating how to eat on busy days, fueling for a big race, figuring out a nutrient deficiency, or trying to sift through the confusing world of supplements, I am here to help. Fuel for Life Crew is the easiest and most cost-effective way to work with me. For just $30 a month, you get access to tons of nutrition guides, pre-recorded masterclasses, monthly live calls, and a private Slack community where you can ask me all your nutrition questions and connect with other busy, active people just like you. I currently have masterclasses on travel nutrition, race day nutrition, micronutrients for athletes, everyday fueling for athletes, and so much more. There's absolutely no commitment. You can try it for a month and cancel anytime if it's not for you. You can visit my website, eatforendurance.com, to sign up or explore my blog, free downloads, and of course, my one-to-one services. Thank you so much. All right, let's get back to the episode. So since you work at Maurten, we got to talk about bicarb.
Of course. Hot topic.
I know, hot topic. I did cover this recently with another dietitian, but as I was saying offline, like you work at Maurten, so we got to talk about it. What would you like to say about bicarb? What do you want listeners to know about it?
Oh my gosh, that's a big question.
I know. Letting you take the lead.
Yeah, thank you. I usually end up talking about a few different points when I talk about bicarb, which is a lot, as you can imagine. First is that like sodium bicarbonate has been around for a very long time. It's historically like been trusted as one of the very few effective supplements that are out there, right? Like IOC has had it as one of its 5, top performance supplements. Australian Institute of Sport has it as a grade A evidence-based, supportive supplement. So we know sodium bicarbonate works and it's not new. It's just what Maurten has done is try to make that much more tolerable on the GI system, which I think has sparked this big attention around sodium bicarbonate, which is pretty cool. But I think a lot of athletes might not understand the mechanisms or what needs to happen for them to get the most bang for their buck from it. I think what's unique about the Maurten system is that, it's the mini tablets are in a hydrogel, so they're protected from the stomach acid, which is really why sodium bicarbonate has had such a negative performance paradox here. It's because if you think about a really strong acid and a really strong base together, it's like a 5th grade science class, the volcano is exploding, So how do we
inside your stomach,
that?
Just what you want.
Yeah, let's try to minimize that. So, we've been able to really apply what we do for encapsulating carbohydrates, but encapsulate the sodium bicarbonate, which is cool because it makes it now the ability to do research of athletes that can tolerate it and actually see the performance benefit is exciting. Because I think a lot of the research up until now, the amount of athletes that would drop out of studies because they would have GI side effects, it's like you can only get so much out of that, right? So I think it's an exciting time for sports science to start to see what are kind of those greater applications of sodium bicarb. And the other unique thing about Maurten is that they are extended release. So the levels of blood bicarbonate in your body are going to stay elevated for quite a long time. And that also opens up the window of applicability to maybe longer duration exercise than, historically speaking, what sodium bicarbonate has been used for.
That was really my next big question is endurance sports, right? Because so far, or at least I haven't seen kind of the research to support that. And it's very anecdotal and kind of experimental right now. And I'm just kind of curious what you're seeing, what maybe you said you experimented for yourself in racing and what you've seen with your athletes. So yeah, curious to hear all about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one situation where especially the kind of more professional athletes tend to be ahead of the research sometimes. So this is something that I think will continue to come out. There was a study last year showing a 1.4% improvement using sodium bicarbonate for a 60-minute time trial on the bike. So again, we're starting to open up that 15-minute window to 60 and understand that there are some performance benefits. I will say a lot of elite professional marathoners, Ironman triathletes, you name it, long distance, are utilizing sodium bicarbonate. And I think the few takeaways we have as like a nutrition team is that one, like endurance activity, especially a race, is never static, right? So there's going to be hills, there's going to be surges, especially if you're more in that like professional pack where you're catching up to somebody, you're doing a sprint at the finish, you name it. You have these like harder intensity efforts throughout a longer duration exercise. And what, sodium bicarbonate can offer there is to not let that muscle get so acidic. So when you do need to perform at maybe a higher intensity, it can hit that easier. You're not going to have that same acidity feeling, that hydrogen buildup in your muscle. The other thing that's interesting is that sodium bicarbonate, it seems to work on pain perception. And this is a super interesting space for research, I think. So, that likely is also playing a role here of being able to tolerate pain at super high intensities a little bit more easier. I think there's a lot of really interesting things, that if the muscle is going to not get as acidic, we can have a better rate of glycolysis as well. Now we're able to utilize the carbohydrate. So there's so many actions of sodium bicarbonate that's outside of just like the hydrogen buffering that we know of, and that it's like essentially like the main, use case for that. I think we're still going to keep learning and is really exciting for athletes that maybe want to experiment for those longer distance races.
So how is it used in terms of like if we were to do a long, like some sort of long race? So whether it's a marathon or an Ironman ultra, so obviously that is kind of a few hours to many, many, many hours, depending on how long, I guess. Are you still just taking it before you start and that's it? Are people ever
Yeah.
taking it during? Like, what is the timing like for this?
Yeah, great question. The recommendation is still going to be taking it ahead of time. So, we do a lot of like physiological testing as dietitians as part of the nutrition and R&D team. So we're actually testing athletes' blood bicarbonate levels to see how it responds to ingesting it. And we know that we need a certain amount of rise in the blood to get an ergogenic effect. So it's going to take, let's say on average 90 minutes to 2 hours to take that peak effect. So we're still going to have the athlete take it 90 minutes out of their race after fueling appropriately, might I add, like a proper breakfast, of course. And then, once those levels are elevated, it is individual, but generally speaking, we're seeing them elevated for 6, 7, 8 hours, if not more. So we have this really big window of opportunity to utilize the buffering capacity. Obviously, it will depend on how intense the races and what dose they use and all this other stuff. But yeah, I think the window is so long that they can take it before. There's curiosity around top up doses during ultras and all of that. I think we're still learning more. I think, again, it's just super exciting time to study the whole supplement because now that we have a product that you might be able to actually do that with and tolerate, it's exciting.
Yeah, totally. Okay. So that's bicarb. Is there anything else you want to say about bicarb?
I was just going to say, like, just for all of our athletes listening, like, bicarb is the top cherry on top, the 1%, the 2% performance benefit. And I know every dietitian is going to say the same thing, but hopefully also hearing it from Maurten themselves, like we need you fueling properly, right? Carbohydrates are going to be more important. The impact of carbohydrates, that can be 10, 12% on your performance improvement, not 1%. So like recognizing that either let's nail that down first, your fueling strategy and getting up to that 60, 90 grams, whatever your goal is, and then layering in a bicarbonate if it makes sense. And or if you're already taking bicarb, don't skip the rest of the fueling, right? Like we still need to fuel. We need to take a gel after the warm up. We need to take a drink mix during, like whatever the case is. I think that's another thing I'll just nicely remind our athletes of that, carbohydrates are going to be the number one focus no matter what.
Totally. And that's literally what the other dietitian said as well. Is it's the cherry on top. Supplements always are the cherry on top. The other thing you brought up was athletes taking in way too much sodium and prioritizing it over proper fueling. And I'm curious if can you elaborate on that in terms of what you've been seeing?
Yeah. I think such a convoluted and maybe hotly debated topic, but big picture, due to the very big focus around electrolytes right now, athletes might gravitate towards that before looking at their carbohydrate ingestion strategy, but also not necessarily recognizing that the amount of like sodium, et cetera, that you're going to need to take in is going to be reliant on the fluid that you're taking in. So can we look at your fluid first and your fluid intake? And, there's a great flow chart from Asker You Can Droop and Alan McCubbin that I always show athletes. And it's like, is it less than 4 hours? You probably don't need sodium, actually. Like, let's look at your fluid needs. Let's figure out how much you're sweating out, like in terms of water weight you're losing, and kind of go through that flow chart and let them take it and understand, like, how do we get a little bit more intentional about this and make sure that you're keeping the most important thing, which is going to be the water intake and the carbohydrate intake. Because if you look at the studies, like there's not a ton on sodium ingestion and performance.
It really is an interesting topic. And I totally know which flowchart you're talking about because I remember looking at that. And of course, with the studies with that, like if we're thinking about individual losses and let's say someone who is losing a lot of salt, are you still recommending for say a shorter endurance effort, so less than 4 hours per that flow chart, that they don't really focus on sodium intake? Or what is it that you're recommending? Because I see recommendations across the board here, like all kinds of different recs. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, so many research showing that sodium is going to be important if you're, kind of replacing less than 70% of your body weight in fluids. It's so independent and individualized. It depends on how much is the athlete refueling with, right? Rehydrating with, and then will be appropriate with, the other aspects of electrolytes or whatever else they want to add in. I think the other thing to remember is that sodium content in your sweat is going to change, right? So if you're more acclimated to the heat, you're going to lose less salt. So it's like someone does one sweat test and is like, that's what it is from now on. It's like, probably not. Did you eat more sodium that night? Like, right. So it's going to be in flux. And we have so much salt in our bodies. I think that's like 60 to 70 grams. So like if you lose a couple thousand milligrams, it's actually not that much in the big ocean of things. So like there's a time and a place, absolutely, especially when we start talking ultras, we start trail, we start like long distance, like yes, we need to pay attention to all of this. But I'd rather an athlete like nail down their carbohydrates and nail down their hydration strategy and then and as appropriate what they need from the sodium.
What's interesting here too is that a lot of people report feeling better though with some of these. I mean, I think some drinks absolutely go above and beyond what you need, but like at the same time, people who are drinking like plain water, even if they're meeting the carbohydrate goals, are not always feeling as great, especially if it's hot out. I mean, and again, it just really depends on how much fluid we're talking about. This is why it's so hard to talk about hydration. Yeah, hydration is so tricky.
And like, if it's flavored, you're going to drink more water. So it's going to help the bigger goal. So like, great, right? So I think there's so many factors that, you know, having athletes come to me like, I'm taking 4,000 milligrams an hour. I'm like, okay, we gotta.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not having people go crazy on sodium, but I am generally speaking, even for, say, my marathoners, because, you know, typically, not always, but typically that's under 4 hours for many people, or sometimes. But for like that kind of crew, we're still including electrolytes somewhere, but we're not overdoing it. Of course, we're assessing how much fluid and what the conditions are and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think in this day and age, people are, you know, popping Element and putting in their water every day, and they're like drinking electrolytes all day long. And you go in the airport and there's just like a million supplements, and noon is in grocery stores. And I mean, there's stuff everywhere, right? And so yes, sodium is important and you want to replace losses. And then yes, much like with fluid, this becomes far more important as your losses are compounded over greater periods of time. So in these like more ultra endurance situations, it's a very interesting one because I'm not saying that people don't need sodium for these shorter endurance efforts. At the same time, I'm trying to discourage people from like going off the deep end because everyone's just like, I'm cramping, I need salt. And I'm like, well, but cramping is a multifactorial thing. And how much is placebo? And yeah, so it's tricky.
Yeah, the cramping messaging, I think, has started to change. You know, so long ago, it was like, oh, sodium is going to be related to cramping 100%. And now it's like, the research doesn't actually show that. So let's not necessarily just like throw salt at it because it's probably not going to solve the problem. It's super interesting and again, so nuanced to the individual that when you start to dig in, you can usually find the balance of all the different things that you want to look at. So like, what did they eat that morning? Are they doing it fasted? Then yeah, you haven't had electrolytes because you haven't eaten. So it's like, there's so many things to think about.
Yeah, this is what makes it really difficult, like making generalized recommendations. But one thing I want to touch on briefly. So like Maurten, I haven't tried Maurten's drinks, but they tend to be lower sodium than many other products, right? Do I have that wrong?
I mean, I think it depends what you're comparing it against. The drink mix has 240 milligrams of sodium. So,
oh, okay, maybe not. It's like a little lower than a Tailwind or Scratch or that kind of thing.
I think it's pretty on par with a lot of the products out there. The sodium in the drink mix is mostly paired to the sodium alginate that's used to create the hydrogel formation, that 3D structure. And then if you, have or have not seen, we have a kind of like a newer updated drink mix that has a teensy amount of sodium bicarbonate in it. And that is not to give like bicarb benefits. That is actually to keep the pH of the drink mix neutral to protect tooth enamel. And that is something that's actually a priority of Maurten since the very beginning, because they saw that one of the top priorities of the Olympic Committee was to protect athletes' teeth because they were just coming in with all these cavities from sports drink and acidity from chews and, all the things that we use. So everything that Maurten comes out with is going to be over, like higher than the level for, dental caries. So kind of an interesting tidbit there.
I mean, I do, of course, think about dental issues, and it's obviously a huge piece. I remember back to becoming RD and studying, and we think about just dental health as being such a huge piece of nutrition, because obviously if there's an issue with your teeth, you are not going to be able to eat as well. But yeah, that's really interesting. Very cool. Is there anything else you want to kind of touch on in this conversation of things you kind of see, or I don't know, any other themes you've kind of observed?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the only other thing, I think being able to work with different types of athletes is noticing the difference of like what type of fuel the athlete is going to reach for. Having worked with now like gravel cyclists that are in a race versus a marathon runner that kind of, might be more their individual race versus the pack, that can influence when they're fueling. And I think that was something interesting to me as a dietitian, thinking about like, well, yeah, team sports, we know you'll fuel during the timeouts, or running, you can keep your gels on you or drinks on you and take those as needed. But let's say you're in a cycling race, whether that's gravel or not, and people shoot out the gate at first and it's a super hot start, you're not going to be reaching for your bottle in the first 25, 30 minutes, right? Or you have a really long climb that's an hour. Like, I just think it's really interesting for athletes to, when they're doing race planning, I'm sure, again, as an RD, you're talking through this already, but for any athletes listening, like, what is the race actually going to look like in terms of feasibility of fueling? Where are the hills? Where's the surges? Where's the moments that you either feel like you're going to, want to top up, or you're going to be a little behind, or you're, again, expecting like a push in pace? Like, how do we really get specific around the race you're training for? I'll pull up an elevation map and be like, all right, are we taking the gel right before you hit that hill? Are you taking it on the downhill? Right. So like really starting to get in the nitty gritty. And I think that can help all athletes, but especially to like empower them to make the race fueling like their own. And I find that important.
Do you have any general tips, whether it's kind of looking at an elevation profile and like when it's typically best to take that gel or whatever it may be, or kind of handling really technical section or a long period where you're really not able to reach for your bottle or things like that? Like, what takeaways can you give my listeners on these things?
Yeah, I think, if there are going to be technical sections, I will usually have an athlete like back up to before then and take advantage of proper, like maybe you're going a little bit more in the fueling if it's going to be a longer text section where you're not going to be able to fuel. So, all right, in that mile or two before, that's when maybe you're going to take, a gel that has 40 grams instead of 20 grams. And that's going to carry you a little bit longer, or you're, going to do whatever hydration strategy we've discussed. And so I'll usually like back up and think about that. And then sometimes, again, like I also have athletes that if it's just a long climb, they're okay with fueling because on the downhill, they don't want to take their hands off the bike or whatever. So it just like depends, I think, as with everything in nutrition. Yeah, I think it's like their comfort. And then we find out together, like working alongside the athlete, all right, when do you feel most comfortable to make sure that this section, you don't drop into this like kind of glycogen depleted state.
Yeah, no, that's how I'm with trail running. Like on the hill, like climbing, I'm fine. Like I'm hiking basically. Like I can totally eat or drink and do whatever, but going down, forget it. Like I'm not. And also like usually the longest I'm going down is like a mile or mile and a half or whatever. Like it's not that long. I can deal with it. Maybe I can like grab a little sip of something, but I'm definitely not eating when I'm running downhill. That's not usually sitting well in my stomach.
But like also that brings up a good point, because if you think about like and I am not a trail runner, so like correct me, but I'm assuming like when you're going downhill, your foot placement and like attention to detail can be important, right? So you need that like carbs for your brain too, for like being on guard and alert when you hit the downhill. So then you're not just like downhill.
Yeah. And of course, like if you're like a pro trail runner, like you're running up the hill, you're not power hiking like me who doesn't care about time or whatever. That's really interesting. And, I haven't yet done a triathlon, but I imagine once I'm on the bike, I'm going to be so freaking scared that it'll be really a big shift for me figuring out how to fuel and just like taking hands off the handlebars to like eat things. Like, I don't know how people are like ripping open wrap. I guess use your teeth or whatever, but like, yeah, I don't know. That's going to be a whole new world for me figuring that piece out.
Yeah, that is my personal sport of choice these days. And I think that was a big learning curve, even as a dietitian, right? Being able to be like, all right, I need to make these bottles really saturated with carbohydrates because I now am more comfortable, but like ripping open a gel is a challenge. So how can I make sure I have enough bottles on my bike to meet the 2.5 hours of the 70.3, bike distance or whatever the athlete is doing? It's like, all right, all these logistics around it.
Yeah. Well, so tell me a little bit about your current training and what you're up to. So it sounds like you're mostly into triathlon. Like, how long you been doing that? What are you training for right now? Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've fallen in love with triathlon. I think, when I first started running, I ended up getting injured a lot and ended up swimming and biking a lot. And I kind of realized I enjoyed those sports as well. So did a couple when I lived in New York, but really fell back in love the last couple years and moved up to the 70.3 distance. And currently training for I'll do my fifth one this September and then going to Worlds in November. So that'll be a really fun experience, I think. I'm excited.
Where is Worlds?
It's in Marbella, Spain.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah.
And where's the September race?
I'm going to Michigan,
okay.
Which is supposed to be a great course. So I'm really excited about that. You continue learning yourself as an athlete, like with different distances and challenges. It's like you have to fuel really well on the bike to be able to have a good run. And that is something that I think can be helpful for people to start to learn and play around with.
Yeah. I was talking with another dietitian yesterday who's also a triathlete, and we were talking specifically about triathlon nutrition before kind of diving into some other things. And I'm curious kind of what your race nutrition looks like. What are you kind of taking right before the swim and, in transition on the bike and in the run? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. I'll probably do like Maurten calf gel before the start of the swim. I will have my bottles full of 320 drink mix and then add in some gels, like, depending throughout the bike just to top off a little bit. But, hitting pretty decent carb numbers and then a bottle of plain water as well, just, get that refreshing taste. And then on the run, I'm taking a gel every 5K. I think that has worked really well for me alongside obviously like water on the course and everything else. But yeah, it's been great having like the very concentrated fuel of a drink mix type of thing that I can have a bottle that has 100 grams of carb and feel really good with it. So yeah, it's been a fun kind of thing to explore.
Awesome. Awesome. Is there anything else you want to add to this conversation or share about yourself or anything I'll throw in for a wrap up?
It's been great. Yeah. Connecting and just being able to kind of brainstorm with another dietitian is always really fun. So I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I always like to wrap up my interviews with some quick bites questions. So what is your favorite pre-workout meal or snack?
Ooh, a good quality bagel with peanut butter.
Do they have good bagels in DC?
They have a few. We do get delivery from New York. Like we will order them online because we're snobs.
Yeah, same.
So
totally.
Depending on when the bagel delivery has happened, but yeah.
Yes. Where do you order from?
We get the Essa bagels.
Same.
Really?
The only thing is I'm sure it's maybe you get them faster since you're on the East Coast, but like by the time I get them here, they're like almost 2 days old. So it's like you have to like immediately freeze. But when I lived in New York City, I swear if the bagel wasn't hot, I was like, I'm not eating that. It's like it has to be fresh out of the oven. And now I'm like, 2-day-old bagels. Great.
Still better. Yeah.
Still better than what I could get elsewhere. Very cool. What about post-workout? What are you going for?
Ooh, I think it depends. I really enjoy a breakfast burrito. So depending on timing, that could be something I'm hunting down. But if it's really hot, sometimes just like a smoothie until I can really eat something, like nothing better than just like a refreshing fruit and yogurt and just like peanut butter, all that good stuff in a smoothie to like let my stomach settle until I can actually get some like really good quality food in.
Are you a fan of protein powder in your smoothie, or are you kind of relying more on yogurt and other foods?
Yeah, totally. I think it just depends on what I have around and what I'm creating in my concoction. But yeah, I think, throwing in some whey protein can be so handy, again, just to help get that in. And again, depending on what I have is going to be more the dictating thing.
What is the most exotic or interesting food that you've ever tried?
Oh, gosh, that's a good question. I'm not a very exotic eater, but I will say I went to Arizona when I was a gymnast in like middle school. And I remember we all tried rattlesnake, which at the time was like, it was just like breaded. It tasted like chicken, but at the time it was crazy. So that is still.
I would think it's still crazy to eat now. I don't know if I would eat rattlesnake.
Like the tiniest bite. Yeah, exotic eating.
Okay. How do you like your eggs cooked?
Ooh, I'm going fried eggs, like medium. Yeah.
What is your favorite beverage?
Honestly, probably sparkling water. Just like a good old LaCroix.
Dietitians are so boring.
I know. It's
I know,
like
kidding.
so lame.
It's like water or seltzer.
It truly is like not exciting.
I get you. I'm right there with you. Sparkling water is my fave. So I can drink that all day. I mean, I don't, but I would. What are your comfort foods?
Pizza is like my favorite food in general. So that is always going to be on the market. And just like a warm bowl of noodles. If it's winter, that'll be one of the choices for sure.
That's one thing I miss from New York City. Well, I miss all food from New York City, but like getting really good ramen. And we can totally, like in the Bay Area, I can get that, but I'm South Santa Cruz County and I don't know. It's not the same. Like I just remember being in New York City a couple years ago and just getting this like massive bowl of like ramen with all these amazing things. We were like really hungover at the time. And I was just like, this is the best thing I've ever had.
Bringing you back to life.
Yes, exactly. What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Usually the thing that has the most additions in it. So like if it has, Reese's Pieces and an Oreo and a cookie dough, like whatever else you can throw in an ice cream, I am all for it. So yeah, any of those like moose tracks, I don't know, you name it.
I always like to joke that like people always fall into a category of like vanilla, like you may not put a single thing in my ice cream or like put all the things in the ice cream. So that's funny. Okay, last question. Top 3 items of gear that are most essential to your active lifestyle.
Oh my gosh. That's a good question. Wow. Okay. Besides sports nutrition.
That can be it. This is open-ended. Okay. Whatever you want.
I think given how much I enjoy swimming, I'm going to have to say goggles because I don't want to swim without goggles. Running shoes, because also not into the barefoot running. And like clothes that are like dry tech kind of versus when I started running and I was wearing all cotton clothes.
Yeah. Like, we don't like chafing here.
I think that's been a great addition to all of our athletic lifestyles, having clothes that are not going to chafe and just not going to like sit on you when you're sweaty. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Lauren. This is so much fun just catching up and chatting with you. If people want to find you, reach out, learn more about Maurten or whatever else, where can everyone find you?
Great question. Yeah, my email is lauren.thomas@maurten.com. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with me. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Have a good one.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, that's our show for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. If you are enjoying this free content that I am putting out each and every month, well, every other week, I guess, it would be a huge, huge help if you can go and leave me a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen or watch. It takes 2 seconds. That really, really helps me out. You can share it with a friend or on social media. That's also super helpful as I try to grow this show. You can also support me financially if you would like over on Patreon. You can give me $1 or $5 or whatever you'd like over there. There's some fun perks involved. And of course, I love hearing from you guys. So if you want to give me some feedback or you want to submit a topic request or ask a question for an upcoming Ask Me Anything episode, you can do all of that if you email me at claire@eatforendurance.com. Or of course, you can go over to my website, eatforendurance.com, and find my contact info there. All right, guys, have a good one, and I'll see you all next time.